Today, we're going to have an interview with the feminist La Scapigliata. This is a nickname she chose to have in order not to disclose her real identity, the word of the century, I guess. And later on, we will hear from our American sisters, Dansky, Lierre Keith, and Jesika Gonzalez, who had a terrible incident this week. We also would like you to know that there has been an attack on our sister, our Mexican sister, Laura Lecuona. She has been hounded by transactivists. She had to cancel a presentation of her upcoming book at the book fair in Guadalajara. So we have a support letter for her in our website, which you can find at the resources section. Read it and please share it. So I'm going to start the webinar now by introducing our friend Zan, who's going to be interviewing La Scapigliata. She wrote a book under the pseudonym, the nom de plume Isidora Sanger. As I said, she doesn't want to disclose her real name. And they are going to be talking about her recent published book, which is called Born in the Right Body, Gender Identity Ideology from a Medical and Feminist Perspective. Thank you very much for being here, and over to you, San and Isadora. I'm delighted to have you here with us.
All right, so my first question, La Scap, how are you today?
Oh, I'm all right, thanks. I've got a little bit of asthma, so I apologize in advance if I sound a bit breathy, but I will try my best. And thank you everyone for inviting me here. It's a real honor.
We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks.
Okay, so, I was wondering, well, the book, first of all, is written in chapters, but really it's a collection of wonderful essays. You can jump in at any point. But how did you come to write the book? What was your process?
Well, I started looking into this issue around 2012, which is when I noticed this new phenomenon of not only men identifying as women, but the whole society going along with it as it's a real thing. And also I noticed that the violence towards feminists, and especially feminists who will not validate these identities, escalating online. Soon after, I became aware what was being done to children via pediatric gender reassignment. And around 2016, I joined Twitter. And at that time, it was very difficult to really comprehend the enormity of what was happening behind the scenes. So we were just seeing the surface of it. And on the surface, there were a lot of really strange and incomprehensible claims that seemed to be supported by the medical and legal establishment. So being a doctor, that interested me because in medicine, we always look at things that are not necessarily our business. We're not specialists in it. We trust that our colleagues who are specialists in the area are going to adhere to the ethics and, follow evidence. And, we trust that they will do the right thing. But it was just starting to really not make much sense. And the essays I started to write in order to clarify to myself, it was pretty much my own thought process, following evidence, following logic, trying to figure out what is happening. During that whole journey, I met a lot of people, a lot of other healthcare professionals who kept reaching out. And at one point, they started asking me to put everything in one place so that it's shareable, rather than posting links to my various threads and essays and whatnot. So I decided to put it together. And then by that stage, 2020, 2021, a lot has changed since, when I first started writing. So I thought, let's update everything. And then I've come across a lot of research, a lot of other sources that helped me understand. So I decided to reference it all. And then I thought, well, might as well just make it into a book. And that's basically how this happened. So.
Wonderful, wonderful. So in the first essay, entitled About, in quotes, trans women are women, end quote, you discuss how, in quote, trans women, end quote, two words came about. So in that, just to preface that, the trans women in that quote, second quote, well, both quotes are two words. So would you talk about this two words versus one word thing with the notion of trans women?
Yes. When I first started looking into this, there was still referred to as trans women, one word, and no one was confused about the fact that these were men. And the fact that sex can't be changed, people, understand that, I think. And there was no ambiguity about who we are talking about, who is, behaving in this way. What these men are asking, such as, that we refer to their neogenitals as vaginas and to women's actual vaginas front holes. I think that was possibly Planned Parenthood leaflet that I saw. And however, very soon after, I started seeing that it was no longer good enough to refer to these men as trans women. You had to now call them trans women. And women were being, told off and called bigots for still writing it as one word. And soon after, the argument that trans women are women, just like tall women, disabled women, Black women, that's what we started to hear from trans activists. And then our attempt to explain why men are not women and why we're not the same, whatever we call each other, because women are female and trans women are male. Trans activists use that separation of trans and women to then assert that because women are female and trans women are women, then trans women must be female too. And at this point, quite rapidly, institutions started using words such as menstruator, cervix heaver, birthing body, all those dehumanizing terms for women. Cis women as well. We were no longer women, we were cis women, and suddenly everyone had to refer to these trans women as just women, and we were cis women or menstruators or chest feeders. And it's become apparent to me at that point why the separation was necessary. And then that was a very clever linguistic sleight of hand that has turned out to be extremely destructive, because you no longer were allowed to say what women are, because female biology was separated from the word woman, and you were now transphobic if you even tried to talk about female biology, just like you were considered transphobic if you tried to say that, no, I'm sorry, but these men are not women, women are adult human females. So I decided to kind of open the book with that essay, just discussing various aspects of how this change in language affected both the category of these males as well as the women's rights.
Great. Yeah, I know throughout the book, you always return to the linguistic, the language, co-opting of language, right? It's just, yeah. Okay, let's see. Later you discuss the medical implications of gender dysphoria, body dysmorphic disorder, and eating disorders. So how are these related? I don't understand how they're related.
Well, there are many different ways in which they are related, but one of the ways that I think is the clearest is that all of these psychiatric phenomena tend to affect adolescents, and particularly adolescent girls. If you think, I don't know what generation everyone is listening to this chat, but when I was in high school, everyone was bulimic or anorexic or aspiring to be. That was the social contagion that was affecting girls. Today, I think there are graphs that will show how diagnosis of anorexia and bulimia and eating disorders have just dropped off to nearly zero, whereas at the same time, the diagnosis of gender dysphoria has skyrocketed. And adolescent girls, again, now constitute about 70% of referrals to gender clinics. So it appears that because psychiatric phenomena are not necessarily, they're not set in stone. There is no they're descriptive. They are terms that are based on phenomenology, on observing symptoms, how they affect people, and these things can change. And psychiatric symptoms are shared between different, mental conditions. So both eating disorders and body dysmorphia and gender dysphoria seem very disproportionately focused on modifying the body in an attempt to alleviate psychological distress. They are characterized by psychological distress, which is focused on the body in some way or form. And with it's not hard to see why that is. It's because often, like with eating disorders, we've known that in reasonably chaotic situations, maturing girls in a sexualized society, suffering trauma, dysfunctional homes, there is not a lot of control that adolescent girls have over their environment. But one way that they can exert control is perhaps over their bodies. So it becomes something to displace all of this sense of helplessness and confusion and angst and focus on something that they can intervene and achieve a semblance of control in their lives. And I think whether now you're seeing a lot of psychiatric comorbidities in adolescents diagnosed with gender dysphoria, and one of the main ones are eating disorders, but also autism and anxiety, depression, trauma, family dysfunction. And that is very similar to what was happening with eating disorders in the past. So I think we give things labels, and these labels have shifted, but in essence, I think these three phenomena are related. And one of the things as a doctor that really interested me is that we are not going around saying to anorexics, yes, of course you're fat, and here is liposuction to, sort out your feeling of distress about being fat. We don't do that because it would seriously harm anorexic girls. So why are we going to girls who are claiming to be boys and saying, yes, of course you're a boy, and here is a double mastectomy? It just makes absolutely no sense. Yeah. And yet our transactivists are very clear about trying to silence and demonize anybody who draws those parallels. So
Wonderful. Yeah. I made a lot of notes about the essay Transgender Medicine as Departure from First Principles. First of all, could you explain what first principles are? This is a medical term.
Well, I think first principles refers to reasoning from first principles, generally speaking, and it is the way you approach any problem. You break it down to its constituent parts, go down to the basics, and then you ask pertinent questions, you look at evidence, and then you formulate an opinion. But so medicine is very much based on this kind of reasoning. We encounter a lot of things that are very familiar to us. We learn pattern recognition, we make spot diagnosis, but often we encounter things we're not really clear about what is going on. And regardless of your specialty, every doctor can just resort back to that first principles thinking, to just look at the problem critically and assess it and decide what's the best course of action. But I think to my mind, the main first principle of medicine is the ethical principle of first doing no harm.
Right.
And because as you can imagine, medicine is actually quite a potentially harmful discipline. We use poisons in certain doses and in order to, cure illness or alleviate pain. But if they're given erroneously for, and in something that is not the right indication, if they're given in excess amounts, they can harm patients. Surgery is very brutal. It opens the body up, it cuts it, it removes parts. In any other context, it would be seen as horrific violence. But in medicine, if it's done appropriately, it is in fact life-saving. So medicine is a very powerful tool. And if it's misused, it can actually cause a lot of harm, which is why, the first principle is to first do no harm. So when we're looking at the, sorry, go on.
Let me add to that, because in this essay you use some of the headings are disorder versus difference, normal versus abnormal, good versus bad outcomes, body versus mind. So could you touch on some of those in terms of this idea of first principles?
Yeah, I mean, that was referring to gender dysphoria. So it is a novel diagnosis that has replaced gender identity disorder. And current diagnosis is heavily rooted in gender stereotypes and how people who don't conform with gender stereotypes are in some way, and then desire to present as the opposite sex, how they should be affirmed and given these very drastic medical interventions. So from the first principle of first do no harm, that immediately rings bells. And looking at how gender dysphoria is framed, so in disorder versus difference, there is a lot of conflation about what is a disorder, what is the difference. So, for example, males and females, men and women, they're different by design.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a disorder.
Right.
Right. Disorder is, in fact, something that is abnormal, that limits function, and, that affects the quality of life. So, a pathology is what a disorder is. Being female is not a pathology. However, I've seen insurance companies frame female chest as an abnormal, as a congenital abnormality in girls who identify as boys. Mm-hmm. And then the reasoning leads to them recommending mastectomies to adolescents in order to reconstruct normal male chest, So mm-hmm. in that section, I talked about the conflation of disorder and difference, and how it is, again, part of the linguistic reversal in order to justify these interventions. In terms of normal and abnormal, again, I focused on HRT. It is, everyone knows, women will know, hormone replacement therapy. And in men, if they have their testicles removed and they need testosterone, or if they have disorders of sex development with low testosterone, testosterone is then replaced to what would be normal physiological level for that sex. Same with women, HRT. In menopause, estrogen drops and sometimes causes symptoms, and we replace the hormones in order to bring it up to what were physiological levels before the symptoms occurred. However, the transactivists have turned it around to claim that feminizing doses of estrogen given to men so that they can develop breasts and try to mimic female appearance are also hormone replacement therapy. Mm-hmm. So it's not, because it's not replacing the hormones that were there and now aren't due to aging or disease. Right. But it has been reframed in such a way so that it can then be claimed that it is a life-saving treatment, so that it can be claimed that it's just the same as prescribing estrogen to menopausal women, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. So, yes, I explored, I think, that in that section.
Great. You want to talk about another one, or let's move on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I can go on. So you
I know.
Tell me time-wise.
I know. We've already talked about these things. It's like, just read the book. Actually, it's very readable. I mean, I'm not a medical professional, and even with the medical terminology, it still really is very poignant and easy. I would say interesting in a wonderful way. Let me ask you about the essay, The Imposter Fantasy. So mm-hmm. you get into the internet as facilitating this sort of decoupling of body reality and the projected self, this idea of be whoever you want to be in 2022. And, in the early 2000s, I was a researcher. I was researching online spaces. And this was the early 2000s, 2005, 2007, through the mid part of the century there, the decade there. This was before social media platforms really, had really taken off. And role play was just part of it. It's always been a big part of online culture. So you fast forward to 2022. Do you think this ideology could have taken root in reality, right? Because it's in reality, if the internet had not existed or had evolved differently? Kind of complex question, but.
Well, I don't know how else the internet could have evolved. But yes, I absolutely think that without internet, we would not be here with regards to this problem. I think internet has played several different roles in making this happen. It has led to mainstreaming of pornography, which is implicated in men self-identifying as women. They often credit sissy porn and whatever with discovering that they were really women, whatever. And also young girls are growing up in a very objectifying society where they're also exposed to this hookup culture, and becoming a woman is more stressful, more dangerous than it has been when I was young. But internet has also, I think people have always fantasized about being someone else. That's not uncommon, but internet has it's decoupled us from interactions in real life. And I think you can see that people interact online a lot more, or significant proportion of their interaction is online now, whereas in the past, it just wasn't an option. So now people are able to filter themselves and their opinions and their personas through filtered photographs, avatars, written rather than verbal communication. And normally humans get a lot of their cues from body language, and we are basically used to being in the same room with each other if we're going to speak, or speaking one-on-one over the phone. This visual component of make-believe and increasingly sophisticated games where people who identify as the opposite sex, particularly men, can assume these female personas. And I think our brains are not necessarily that well equipped to tell the difference anymore, especially when this graphics and real life interaction in real time is coupled together. So I think also it's easier for people to just believe someone when a man claims to be a woman. It's easier to believe that if he's sitting behind an anime avatar or heavily photoshopped picture, as opposed to sitting next to a 6'4" man looking pretty sketchy, claiming that he's a woman. There is an absolute awareness immediately in real life of issues that you might not at all connect with cognitively if you are interacting with that man online and discussing these problems. So I think it's led to a lot of people falling for these narratives, whereas if they were allowed to form their opinions on this in real life purely, I think transactivists would not have gotten this far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I totally agree. I noticed it really early on, the whole absence of the paralinguistic features that go along with just talking to a person, that you can tell immediately if they feel how they feel, what they're thinking by looking at them, by looking at their body. It's all missing. It's been an adjustment for those of us that were around before the internet. You discussed DARVO with a case study. Could you explain the acronym and why it's so important?
Well, DARVO is a reaction that perpetrators of abuse often use when somebody, and often their own victim, tries to hold them to account. So they will deny. D stands for deny the accusations. A stands for attacking the victim or the person who is trying to hold them to account. And RVO stands for reversing victim and offender. So the way this plays out, I will just use an example that is familiar to all of us, which is feminists and women who fight for single-sex spaces being framed as abusers, Nazis, bigots by men who are in fact demanding access to women-only spaces like prisons or toilets, even in situations where a man has raped a woman or attacked her. Transactivists will make it look like they will minimize it, or they will still claim that that man is more of a victim than a woman who was in fact victimized because that woman tried to hold him to account. I mean, if you look at J.K. Rowling, there was a really horrible example. She published a children's book and she wanted to allow some children to send drawings so that can be included, and then proceeds sent to charity. And it was a wonderful initiative, and parents of children were posting their photos on J.K. Rowling's threads. And J.K. Rowling has been attacked by transactivists in this way, framed as an abuser and framed as a bigot and whatnot for a long time. And then transactivists were posting pornographic images on that thread and claiming that it is the J.K. Rowling who was a groomer and a pedophile because she allowed children to see it, whereas it was them, in fact, who were posting these images. No one else was exposing children to anything, but it was reframed. And that is a classic example of DARVO. Wrongdoers will blame the victim and will try to shift focus from their own bad behavior. And now the onus is on the victim. Victim is suddenly framed as some kind of an abuser, bad faith person. I mean, anyone who's looked at female survivors of sexual violence trying to hold their abusers to account, this plays out over and over again. Mothers with abusive partners in court, the male partners will try to frame them as the real abusers and themselves as victims. So it's a very common mechanism, and I just thought that it's worth explaining it using some real life examples in order to really clarify why is it women who are both being attacked, whose rights are disappearing, who are also then framed as abusers, whilst men who are abusing them and taking their rights are being framed as the most vulnerable minority in history.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. You have a title in your 17th essay. It's titled "Myth of Asexuality." Could you talk a little bit about that?
What made me notice it is that I think LGBT plus organizations have recently announced this novel new identity, which they're adding to their acronym and their activism, and they're supposedly human asexuals, or ACEs, they call them. And it's actually quite difficult to figure out what they mean by that, because one of the ways that these people who claim to be asexual present themselves on social media or even in the media is in quite sexual ways. You will find articles with women claiming to be asexual whilst presenting in, seductive lingerie or seductive poses. There are lots of stories about how wonderful these asexual women are, who, even though they have no sexual desire, they are still very sexually active with their husbands or boyfriends or clients even. And it really made no sense whatsoever, because as you know, from a medical perspective, humans are not asexual. Asexual reproduction is not what we are about. We are all sexual beings. It's just one of the basic functions. So whether it's in language or in context of this new novel identity, it just didn't make sense. But what really shocked me, apart from the fact that this was the whole new way of presenting females submitting to male sexual desires, even if they don't enjoy it, as an identity. What really stopped me in my tracks is when I saw some doctors who were promoting pediatric gender reassignment, saying that children who are known to lose sexual function, lose any interest in sex because of the drugs they were given, such as puberty blockers, that they're not that's not a side effect of drugs, but in fact that's just simply because these children were asexual to begin with. And I realized that there could be quite a sinister reason why this new identity is now being promoted in order to just cover up the iatrogenic harm of these medication caused harm as a part of this ideological medical treatment.
How does a feminist lens complement your understanding of the medical approach to gender dysphoria?
I don't think that you can really understand phenomena of gender dysphoria and the social, contagion and the capture of public with self-ID without the feminist lens, because I think it's all very much rooted in misogyny, sexism, and homophobia. The mere changing of people's sex stems from sexologists and doctors in the past considering same-sex attracted people abnormal and wanting to convert them to the straight members of the opposite sex. But also, if you want to understand this contagion phenomenon and why so many girls are suddenly identifying as boys, and if you even just want to understand gender dysphoria itself, if you look at the criteria, gender stereotypes of masculinity and femininity are all over it. And I don't think that anyone apart from feminists really pays much attention to gender stereotyping and the effect of gender as a social construct, as a social hierarchy, as Lierre Keith said. And I've never forgotten her saying that, because that was very powerful.
Yeah.
About gender being not a binary, but a hierarchy. That really just made it very possible for me to see through a lot of obfuscations and justifications and newspeak, and see that this is all really about sexism and homophobia, driven by sexism and homophobia, and push for a greater gender conformity and taking rights of women away and giving it to a group of men who are now allowed to police women from within female sex class. So that really helped.
You know, what's going on is that these institutions, I mean, serious institutions, governments, the UN are dead set on normalizing it, you know, like making it normal and right. So
I think they're dead set on normalizing it because they've been bamboozled into thinking that a document called Yogyakarta Principles, which was first published in 2006 and then updated in, I think, 2019. It was done by a bunch of lawyers, and basically it was like a wish list of a transvestite lobby and transsexual lobby, men who wanted to equate it with sexual orientation and use it to achieve this exact thing. This was never ratified by the UN, but it was presented to governments as something that is legally binding. And I think civil servants just, you know, not looking closely enough and not having good enough legal guidance, presume that this is now how things have to be. And then they're quite good at pushing the policies which they think they have to push. And I think that's how we got here, rather than people just going, oh yeah, this is totally legit, we really believe in this. No, I think it was presented to them as something that has to be done.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, as some kind of factually based, yes, phenomenon. Yeah, exactly, right.
You have doctors doing this, you have lawyers agreeing that this is human rights issue. Well, who the hell do you think you are to say no? You've got to do what law tells you. And I think Gender Recognition Act in the UK just deepened, you know, the prepared. I think it prepared the ground. I mean, there are feminist lawyers who are exploring this topic right now. Actually, I think Alessandra Asteriti is writing a lot about it. So if anyone wants to look her up, she will have a lot of good thoughts on it.
So my last question is, what can medical professionals and the rest of us do to address these issues?
Well, I think medical professionals need to remember their training, and they need to start looking at this issue critically, and they need to remember first, do no harm, because I think anyone who is educated to a level that they pass their exams will immediately realize that this is not ethical, what is being done to people. Sex can't be changed. This is harming people. And also 50% of the patients are women. They're now terrified of going into hospital, of being assaulted and abused. And then on top of everything, called transphobic bigots by staff, just because they are objecting to a sexually inappropriate male who is pretending to be a woman in the bed next to them. So, you know, medical professionals, they do have a responsibility towards female patients as well as towards quote unquote trans patients. So they need to remember their basic training and medical ethics. But at the same time, it is very difficult to oppose this because, for example, in the UK, the NHS is completely captured by this ideology and you know, being put through a disciplinary process, being mobbed at work. There are nurses who tried to hold the line, who lost their jobs. It's not easy. We're in the recession. So people just need to remember that they have a job to do, that they need to, you know, stay in the jobs where they are. But at the same time, whenever it's comfortable for them to discuss things with colleagues, to get involved with their respective colleges, to ask pertinent questions. If someone tells you trans women are women, then ask them what makes them women, what makes a trans woman different from a man. And then when they get a reply about gender identity, say, okay, fine, what is gender identity? How do you know whether I have a gender identity? What is this quality that you are hinging everything upon? So I think that I would recommend medical professionals to just be critical, a little bit brave, and to think about all of their patients, including women. And as for the rest of us, I think general public has been working so hard to undo this, what I think is primarily a medical scandal, that, it pains me as a doctor that, medical profession has failed to safeguard patients, and that it's fallen on members of the public to sound alarms and write petitions and crowdfund and etc. So I'll just say, carry on, keep doing what you're doing already, and just look after yourselves, because this is a long fight, and it's expensive and it's hard. And yeah, I think we'll get there together in the end.
Why did you self-publish? I mean, people are asking those kind of questions. Where can I get the book, and who's the publisher? And they said, well, it was self-published. Do you want to talk about why you self-published?
Well, I received the feedback from someone in the publishing industry that essays are difficult to publish, but also a suggestion to rewrite it focusing purely on the medical side of things. And to me, that basically meant remove the feminism out of it, take it out. And when I looked at other books that have come before this one, I've seen women having to use pronouns she for men, having to seed language, having to defang their analysis on this. And also, if someone actually takes on your book, it takes quite a while for that book to hit the shelves. So I thought, all things considered, it was extremely important to me to not compromise on feminism, not compromise on language. And also I felt that it was really important to get it out as soon as possible, because things were really heating up in terms of the battle between the feminists and trans lobby, and that institutions were at that moment still unclear about what is happening. And I thought I could perhaps help by offering a document that has resources and evidence to help things along. So I just, on a balance of, things, I've just decided I'll just carry on and do it. So I've self-published on Amazon. There are no typos in it. I made sure it's well edited, and the paperback looks good. There is also a Kindle. So yeah, it's available for everybody.
What can we do about the medical profession creating perpetual trans patients, and also explain to doctors that trans are practicing fetish? Why are physically doctors going along with the mental health doctors who are no longer in charge of the asylum? That's a few questions.
Well, I think let me think, which essay is that? Possibly essay 19, the really big one, where I talk about the Yoga Carta and all sorts of things, including medical autonomy. I think you'll find that there is actually a lot of pushback within the medical profession, and colleges, at least in the UK, some of them are starting to distance themselves from these treatments. So also Tavistock Clinic, Pediatric Gender Reassignment Clinic, is to shut down. And we've had some reviews. It all probably looks very mild on the surface, but in medicine, it is huge, because we are all programmed to support each other and to, defer to each other's authority, and to actually rebel against self-declared authority of these doctors who are operating in these fields is quite a big thing. So I think doctors are already talking, and women and other people and patients, they should, speak to the doctors if it feels comfortable. But I would just warn that if you need medical help, that is most important. And even if people have lost their heads in terms of gender reassignment, they're still well trained medically, and we have seen women denied medical treatment because they objected to these ideologies. It's just not worth to risk your own healthcare. But if you're comfortable, if you're not depending on anyone treating you at that moment, then yeah, by all means, challenge your doctors, talk to them about reality of sex, remind them of what they already know, and don't let them refer your children to these places, because they're not under control yet. Ethical medicine has not really taken hold in that field. So I would really caution anyone from referring children to gender specialists, and to instead just refer them for supportive mental health care instead.
Super. Well, thank you so very, very much.
Thank you, Zan.